Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll make a start now. Welcome to friends, old and new, and members of the Bob Buzzard fan club. Welcome to BrightGen Summer 18 release webinar. This is the first for us. We're coming to you from both BrightGen offices. I'm currently at our new London offices in Eldon Street by Liverpool Street Station, while Keir's based at our usual BrightGen HQ in Whittam in Essex. For those of you who have attended one of our webinars before, it's the same format as usual. For our new friends, I'll shortly be handing over to my illustrious colleague, BrightGen CTO, Salesforce MVP and all-round guru, Keir Bowden. Keir has waded through this time 517 pages of release notes on your behalf, and he'll outline the highlights for you very shortly. For those of you who haven't been to one of our sessions before, during the webinar, if you'd like to ask any questions at all, please do so. If you could please use the chat or questions facility in the webinar console, I'll collate these throughout the session, pose them to Keir at the end of the session, and he'll do his best to answer those at that point in the proceedings. As you see in front of you, there is the agenda. Plenty to go through. There's quite a few slides, so make yourself comfortable, sit down and put a cup of tea on, and ready to go ahead with the Summer 18 webinar. Without further ado and flannel for me, I'll hand you over to the lad himself, your very own, the wonderful Mr. Keir Bowden.
Thank you, Clive. Your intros just get better and better. It's a pleasure to be here, can I say? Pleasure to be back in Whittam. Yeah, as Clive mentioned, we're trying this through the equivalent of a satellite link, so hopefully the technology will hold up for us. So if we move straight on to our first topic of the Summer 18 release, some tearful goodbyes. So you might remember, if you've been here before, that usually these are fond farewells, but we're actually losing something that I care about this time. So this is a tearful goodbye for me. Force.com is now the Lightning platform, so we're getting a very strong steer from Salesforce to avoid references to Force.com going forward. So I'd expect to see a lot of the documentation and collateral shifting over to that name now. So be prepared to Google for those two different things if that's the way you get information. The Force.com IDE 2 beta is retired and won't be progressing to GA. If you're not a developer, you probably haven't heard about this and you don't care. If you are a developer, the advice is to look at using VS Code going forward. But in my opinion, the VS Code extensions aren't there yet for the wider developer community. You still have to do quite a lot of work to make them work correctly with sandboxes and production orgs. It's clearly the future, but I mean, I would check into it carefully before you decide to move over to it. Chatter Messenger has already retired. It happened after the Spring 18 release, so we're just mentioning it now. And finally, the one that I'm really going to miss is Chatter Desktop. So this retires in Summer 18 in June. I'm not sure exactly when, but I've used this since the first time it came out. Although it's always been a little bit behind the curve, it's been a useful tool just to fire up on the desktop and leave alone. You get notifications, etc. But sadly, it's hanging up its virtual boots, and we're all going to have to move over to something like the Salesforce application or dedicate a browser to Chatter. So that's that. So now on to some more positive things. Some general information that doesn't really sit with any specific cloud. Okay, some more information to begin with on currently supported browsers. The key message here really is that support for IE 11 has been extended through to the end of 2020. I won't go through the rest of them, as I'm sure you can read them as well as I can, and we'll be sharing the slide deck after the event anyway. So I'm sure you'll have noticed there's a real push from Salesforce for more users to switch over to the Lightning experience. And it's fair to say their previous attempts haven't always been well received. There was a bit of a Twitter storm when they introduced some functionality that would pop up something to say to users, would you like to try the Lightning experience, without really any idea of whether there was a planned rollout coming. So I'd imagine this also stands a chance of ruffling some feathers, but if you're looking to migrate users over to Lightning, if you're actually in the middle of that rollout and trying to drive adoption, then I'd imagine you'll find this useful. So since May the 11th, all users with access to the Lightning experience who aren't using the Lightning experience, so they've got the permission, but they're still in Classic, they'll be switched over to it when they log in, either daily at 1 AM or weekly at the same time on a Sunday. You can disable this, but the recommendation from Salesforce is that you don't disable it for the entire org, but instead create just a permission set disabling it for specific users and assign that to them. Of course, if you've already got a planned rollout and you don't want users diving in before everything is ready, then I'd advise you to disable it for the entire org, or even better, don't give users permissions or profiles that include access to the Lightning experience. Next up on the adoption side of things is better in Lightning. So again, this applies to users that have access to the Lightning experience, but are continuing to work in Classic. So users will see prompts when they use a specific feature. The example here is tasks, and they can click on the button to be switched over to the Lightning experience and shown a video about how to use the feature and how it is better in the Lightning experience. And you can also control this via the onboarding and assistance setup node, like the previous item. And so that you can monitor how Lightning adoption is going, there's a new Lightning usage report, which gives you information such as the daily and monthly active users for the Lightning experience in mobile, number of users switching to Lightning, the browsers they're using, which pages are popular, that kind of information. So very useful, again, if you're trying to measure your adoption. As we mentioned in the last webinar, there's a new Lightning experience URL format in town. So this doesn't apply to communities. Communities do seem to be going slightly their own way in terms of some of the Lightning features. This format has been applied to all new orgs created since Spring 18, and after Summer 18, it will be applied to all existing orgs, so this will be turned on. And you can see the example there of the old version and the new version. Update any hard-coded URLs to the new version as soon as you can. They'll keep working for a while, but we don't know when they'll be retired. Personalizing the navigation bar just got easier. You don't need to add any temporary tabs anymore. Just click the pencil icon that you can see there on the right, and you'll be presented with an edit modal where you can move items around, add new items, which then updates the navigation bar for the application. So in this case, you can see I've added in the Cases tab. Easy enough to do for the user perspective, but if you don't want your users messing with the tabs that you've set up, if you think they're the appropriate ones, then you can stop users from customizing it via a setting in the App Manager. I wouldn't advise that. I think users like to be able to customize things, and just because administrators think that they'll use certain tabs doesn't always turn out to be the case. Always give your users as much free rein as you can would be my advice. So next up, some search enhancements. So you can limit searches to specific objects via the new drop-down on the global search bar to the left of where you actually enter the search text. You can filter search results via the fields specified in the search layout for the S-object, so you need to go and configure this through the S-object setup. And in the screenshot here, you can see I'm filtering the account results of a search by restricting the account name to United Oil. So configurable via the search layout for the S-object, and effectively search within search, if you will. And finally, the list email S-object, which is previously known as the mass email S-object, is now searchable. Next up, surveys. You can now tailor survey questions based on responses. So in the example here, if the candidate says they have dietary restrictions, they get taken to a question that captures the information about the restrictions that they have on their diet. Anybody that doesn't do that, we can send them off straight on to the next question. You can now copy a survey rather than having to create them from scratch each time. And there's a single place to view all of the contact survey invitations via a related list that you can add to the contact page layout. And finally, a minor tweak on the rating scale. This used to be 1 to 5, now it's 1 to 10, just to give you a little bit more granularity. Okay, so that's it for general changes. Now we'll move on to the Sales Cloud. So Einstein Forecasting is now generally available. However, there are some requirements you must satisfy to use it. You must be using collaborative forecasting and have a forecast hierarchy set up. You must have 2 years of opportunity history using the standard opportunity object and the standard amount and close fields. I think we've found with some of the testing that we've been doing as well, it's useful if those opportunities are spread over a number of sales reps. If for some reason you have one person owning everything, then you lose some value in that respect. Forecasts must be set by month rather than by quarter, and they must use the revenue forecast type. And finally, you must be using the standard fiscal year in order to use Einstein Forecasting. So here's what Einstein Forecasting looks like. There's a predictions graph that shows past opportunities and predictions about future performance. And this includes Einstein's prediction compared to target and comparisons based on committed opportunities, best case forecasts, and there's some KPIs above the graph there. On the forecast page, there's an Einstein prediction field which shows the predicted amount for each team and each team member, and they're based on all open opportunities with close dates by the end of the month. Sometimes a prediction won't be shown, such as when sufficient historical data isn't available, or the prediction range is enormous, so it's not actually going to tell you anything. You know, a bit like you see on a lot of these daytime TV programs when they're going into the auction house. I value this between £1 and £1 million isn't really very helpful in narrowing things down. Some other Einstein enhancements. The opportunity scoring field is now available for inclusion in custom report types. You can configure lead scoring to indicate fields that are irrelevant to scoring, so you'd like them to be ignored. Just because they happen to be measures or they happen to have specific names, you know that they're not useful, so you can get rid of those. All contacts that Einstein suggests should be added to Salesforce can be viewed in a single place via the new Einstein Contacts Suggestions tab, available via the app launcher. And the same applies to opportunity contact role suggestions as well. And finally, insights are now available to sales reps without them having to connect their email account. And account and opportunity insights are now available in sandboxes. Next, campaigns. You can control access to campaign members. So just because you add lead and contact information to a campaign doesn't actually mean that you have to allow everybody to see their details. So you do that through the standard Salesforce sharing settings, and you'd either say that visibility to lead and contact is controlled by a campaign, or it's controlled by access to the actual record. You can add all contacts from an account to a campaign in a single action. You can filter lead and contact list views by campaign now, and you can also send list emails to campaign members, either directly through a campaign member's related list on a campaign record, or any contact or list lead view that you've filtered by campaign. And finally, you can view the campaign hierarchy from the page header using the button shown below. So if you've seen the account and contact hierarchy button, you remember that, we've covered those in previous webinars, it works in exactly the same way. So next up we have Path, formerly known as Sales Path. This is now supported for contacts. However, this needs to be driven by a custom pick list with stages that reflect the contact journey for your organization. So it's not going to be good enough just to use something like lead source, because a contact is never going to move through any stages on that. If you think about how Path works for opportunities, there is a clearly defined route from an opportunity from being created through to being closed. And you need to find something similar, a similar way to kind of rank contacts as to where they are in that journey. And also in Path, you can now update dependent pick lists when marking a stage as complete via the path through the new edit dependencies dialog that you can see there. Because I've got dependencies marking this negotiation stage as marking this as closed one. There is then a marking this as closed. There is then a dependency of lost reason if I change it into close loss, so that will then be active at that point in time. So that works across all dependent pick lists now. Next up, tasks. You can now create copies of tasks by assigning them to multiple users or groups. So rather than everyone just being added as somehow associated with that task, everybody gets their own copy of it. Because everyone gets their own copy of it, they are disassociated from each other. So everyone gets their own individual task unrelated to the others that they need to complete. Completing one doesn't complete them all. You can now specify more filters in the activity timeline, so reps can choose to see only their own or all activities on a record. And you can create predefined subjects for tasks, so you're not limited to the predefined subjects in Lightning Experience that Salesforce give you. So in the example here, I've created a couple. One is Remind and one is Invite to After Party. But just because they're predefined subjects doesn't mean you're stuck with that. So if I click on Invite to After Party, that field there becomes a straightforward text input field that I can change the information on. Okay, there's a new type of task view available. This is actually quite nice functionality, I think. So we've got the standard list view that we've all known and loved for a while. We've got the Kanban view, which is an additional one in Lightning Experience that anyone using Lightning Experience will be familiar with. Anyone who's not using Lightning Experience, that's actually pretty cool as well. However, this is the new one, which is the task split view. So what this shows you is a list of tasks on the left-hand side, and then the details of the specific task that you click on. So in this case, I've clicked on Create Webinar Slide Deck. So it shows me the details of the task that I can interact with on the right-hand side. I think that's really nice, and I think that will probably start rolling out to a few other S objects as time goes forward, because that could be a real time saver if you've got a lot of things to do around a specific S object type. Next up, I think I've just jumped one ahead there. Yeah, I thought I had. Okay, some changes to emails. So you can drag and drop files into emails now, rather than having to navigate via the file chooser. If you send a lot of emails with files, that's going to save you quite a bit of time, I would think. Nice and modern interface again. You can add HTML now to Lightning email templates. Just click the source button and edit the content. Visualforce email templates are now available in LEX, so people don't have to switch to Classic to use those anymore. But this is for single emails only. You can't use them in list emails. Don't know if you will be able to at some point in the future, but at the moment you can't. And the email template setup node in Classic has been renamed to Classic Email Templates to differentiate from the email templates node in Lightning Setup. If you're using just one or the other, then that probably doesn't really affect you. Okay, Lightning email templates. So these can now all be viewed in one place via the email templates page. This is accessible from the app launcher, so it's not really a setup page as such. It appears like anything else would, like accounts, like contacts. So yeah, that's a new way of accessing that information. They also have a new merge syntax called handlebars. So if you click on the two braces at the bottom right, then you can insert a merge field into the template. Choose which merge field that you want to put in, and this will then generate the merge syntax that goes into the template. I'm guessing it's called handlebars because there's so many braces, and if you look at those at a particular angle, then they look like handlebars. Something to notice here, though, in Lightning email templates with the new merge syntax is I can use a single template here to send emails to users, leads, and contacts, because there's the concept of a recipient rather than having to choose a specific S object type to send that email to. So hopefully you should be able to retire a few email templates if you've got specifically different ones for contacts and for leads. Okay, so that's it for Sales Cloud. Moving on now to Service Cloud. Your agents can now create private drafts for case emails, which are auto-saved every few seconds. So you've always been able to create drafts to some degree, but as soon as you did, they were attached to the case and they were available to everyone with access to the case. That's no longer the situation. They're private to the agent that is creating them until they actually attach them as a public email to the case. You can add internal comments when closing a case, rather than having to add comments via a relating list and then remember to close the case afterwards as two separate actions. And case comments are now supported in global search, and in the feature parity nod, case teams are now available in the Lightning experience. In Omni-Channel, skills-based routing is now generally available. And agents can transfer a work item to another skill set if they feel that they don't have the appropriate skills and it's been inadvertently routed to them, and it needs someone who's got a bit more skill, experience, etc. Omni-channel setup is now available in the Lightning experience, and also agents now have a tabbed view in the Omni-channel utility, which they see in the service console, and that shows them their work versus all work, so they can get a little bit more information out of that one utility item. There's an interesting development, I think. There's a new Service Cloud mobile application that they've launched, which is distinct from the Salesforce mobile app, formerly known as Salesforce One. This is available for Android 5 Plus and iPhone iOS 11 Plus. It says it's not optimized for the iPad, so I'd imagine that means it will probably work but not look great. So the idea behind this is it's intended to be a lightweight alternative to the Salesforce mobile app, specifically targeting service agents. At the moment, I can't see anything it does that you wouldn't do or you couldn't do via the regular Salesforce mobile app. So I guess if that's a distraction to service agents, the additional features, then it would give them a narrower application. But this is the first iteration, so I'd imagine there will be more functionality going into this. What I find interesting is that the Service Cloud team have gone this route, because that suggests to me that the Salesforce mobile app isn't the solution to all things mobile that it's been promised to be. So maybe we'll see a bit more of this kind of thing happening, and maybe the steer from Salesforce will be that if you want specific functionality, then it's not going to come in Salesforce mobile app. You should look at building your own. One to keep an eye on, I think, going forward. So moving on to analytics, the Lightning Experience Report Builder is now generally available. So there's no need to switch back to Classic to build most reports, which is pretty cool. You can filter field history reports by new values as well as the old values. And report charts now reflect all data rather than just the 2,000 records that the report is limited in terms of the number of records it can display. And also there's some feature parity changes, so reports are getting nearer to supporting everything that Classic has. You can group dates by custom granularity, so things like day, calendar month. Pick list field filters now accept null values. Custom date ranges can be open-ended, which means that anything, if you just specify a start date, anything after that is included. Or if you just specify an end date, everything before that is included. Date ranges now accept manually entered values, and joined reports is in beta, so not too far away from having feature parity on that, we hope. However, if you are tempted to start using the joined reports, beta means that it may never become generally available. The functionality may go away. So if you're going to do that, make sure you can live with losing those reports if, for some unforeseen reason, it doesn't make it. Seems unlikely from what I've seen of the betas. However, that's what the agreement says. Okay, next some changes around dashboard functionality. This one's quite nice, actually. You can add target links to a dashboard component. So essentially this means that you can put a component onto a dashboard, and when the user clicks on it, they're taken to wherever that is. And that could be an external website, it could be your corporate intranet, really absolutely anywhere. Just give them something to click on and they can be taken off to that. You can manually subscribe other users to your dashboards. So my advice on that would be to use that power sparingly. Seems like quite a good way to annoy busy people if they suddenly start getting a load of dashboard emails that they haven't asked for and they aren't really interested in. You can now use a report chart directly in a Lightning dashboard component. So again, feature parity with the Classic side of things. And finally, nice little touch, you can show chatter photos on horizontal bar charts based on user data, which allows you to create things like leaderboards quite nicely. So moving on to communities. As is traditional, there is a new template. And the advice from Salesforce is update to the new template as all future features get added to this latest version. However, this is caveated that it may affect your community. So make sure you check the Salesforce help and make sure you test in a sandbox before making any changes to your live community. That said, in this particular release, the changes are really minor. There's a couple of tweaks to the language picker and minor improvements to the property editor. So it's not one you need to panic about if you're not in a position to upgrade that template. Other changes in communities. Customer service Napoli has completed its transition away from Napoli in its entirety, and going forward will be known as the customer service template. You can now change the theme from the community builder to experiment with things as you're creating a community, see what works best for you. Simply select change theme from the themes menu. Communities now support progressive rendering, so this is quite a nice user experience touch. If this is a new term to you, progressive rendering, what it means is that when there's a lot of components to load, placeholders can be displayed for the less important components, and these are then filled out as they're loaded. So if you've used things like the Salesforce mobile app or Facebook on the phone, they've been doing this kind of thing for some time now. You kind of get just, normally it's like some circles and some blank lines that kind of look like where some text might appear, and then that gets filled out later on. So from the user's perspective, it probably doesn't change anything in terms of how long they have to wait to get this information, but because it's doing something and then filling it out, it kind of makes people feel like it's faster, or so studies have shown anyway. Anyway, in order to use this, you have to turn it on in Community Builder Advanced Settings, and then you assign your components to one of three priority groups: highest, high, and neutral. and that controls how they load. So highest will be the first lot rendered, high and neutral will receive placeholders, and then they'll be filled out in that particular order. But make sure, if you're going to go for this, then make sure you test it before publishing, as if you don't get it right, it can make the user experience worse instead of better, and you don't want that. You can now delete unused audiences, or audiences that simply aren't useful to you anymore. If you've got any that you don't want, you can get rid of them. Navigation and tile menus. So previously, when you changed anything in this regard, it was immediately live, which would have been a nice surprise if you weren't expecting that. So now this can be saved as draft and published when you're ready. And finally, you can control what's indexed by search engines out of your community, and that's based on publicly available objects and fields. And the way they're publicly available is that they are enabled for the guest user profile. You can now, in communities, allow users to pause flows. So if they're filling out some information, for example, so you've got the examples here of free identity protection, put in some information there, and somebody's forgotten their address. That does really sound like they need identity protection if they can't remember their address. Disputing a charge I can see as more likely, or if you're being asked to find some financial information, some of your bank account information, something like that, which you might not have to hand, you can pause the flow at that point in time, and then users can resume it at their leisure. You need to enable users to pause flows, and you do that by the process automation settings in setup, and then you add the paused flows component via the community builder, and that's what allows the users to view the flows that they've paused. So here I can see that I've paused 2 of them. The activity timeline is now available for communities, and that's supported for all the objects on the right, which I won't bore you by reading through them because you can read them as well as I can. And some other changes in communities. You can now allow community members to write or update knowledge articles if they've got specialist knowledge or specialist skills. They'll need to be knowledge users, and you'll need to give them the correct permission for the knowledge article type in order to enable this. Locked out email templates can now be customized to reflect your company's brand, so they know exactly who has locked them out. There's no confusion there. Pinning chatter posts in communities is generally available, as it is outside of communities, and you can pin up to 3 posts per feed. And finally, and this is a community-specific thing, it's not available in standard chatter, you can close conversations if there's nothing of value being added to cut down on noise, really. So in this case, there's a question, nobody's going to add anything, so we can just close that off. Remember, chatter in communities only, that one. Finally, for communities, some security enhancements. So administrator-initiated password links. So this is where an admin selects the user and then clicks the reset button for them, are now only valid for 24 hours. So before summer 18, they never expired. They would live forever, but they've got 24 hours basically to be used now. Otherwise, the admin will have to do that again. Users forgot password links. So this is where the user has clicked the forgot password link themselves on the login page. They now only expire when the password reset is completed. So previously they would expire as soon as they were clicked, and some email scanners and the like used to follow the link to confirm there was nothing dodgy about the link, and that would expire it. So this is quite a nice change. So basically that link will be live until you've actually finished resetting your password. And the welcome emails that you receive when a community is made active, you can now configure how long those links are valid for. So you can choose, not got a lot of granularity, you can choose from 1 day, 7 days, or 180 days. So either quite short or very long. And finally, a heads up for next year. As of summer 19, markup in the HTML head element of your community must be compliant in order for it to save. So that will be being enforced by then. So make sure your head markup is in good shape. Okay, that's it for communities. Now moving on to chatter. So as I mentioned earlier, it still hurts, so I'm going to mention it again. Chatter Desktop retires in June, much mourned by me at least. User profiles can now show Trailhead badges, but this has to be the account that the user logs into Trailhead with in order to work. So if your users have got personal accounts that they use for Trailhead, then they won't see anything. And if they don't know what Trailhead is or don't care about Trailhead, they won't see anything either. As per communities, post pinning is generally available, and there's a screen capture of what it looks like, how it's presented to the user. You can pin up to 3 posts per feed. The final entry is quite interesting. You can now link records to a post as you're typing it. So in this particular case of this screen grab, I'm posting something to the admin user feed for some reason. And by doing a / and then typing in some characters, that effectively starts searching for records. So I typed in web, and that showed me the 2 reports at the top, and then there were a few other records. I think there was a contact called webinar or something like that. But as you type ahead, it will go and find matching records, and it's very easy to then link those records to those posts rather than having to copy paste URLs or anything like that. So should be a little bit of a time saver. Next up, mobile. Very quiet release for mobile, which maybe explains why the Service Cloud team are creating their own mobile application. Just a couple of changes to the mobile browser app, really the only important things. The mobile browser app now allows rich text content when posting, so you get the little rich text editor, and you can also share posts, polls, and questions. Reminder, this is the mobile browser app, so it's not the installed Android or iOS device. Just a reminder as well that some behavior is different on the mobile device to the full Salesforce site. So take a look at the help article short linked here for full details if you're considering rolling out Salesforce Mobile to your users. As I said before, you'd have to worry about capturing the links, as we'll be sharing the deck afterwards anyway. Okay, now moving on to our final topic, and as always, my personal favorite, customization. So in case we're not already fed up with everything that's going on in the privacy space recently, or the millions of emails we've been getting, there's some privacy changes in Salesforce as well. So lead and contact records have these individual records. These are typically referred to as individual or privacy records, and they're attached to those, and they contain the information about what the user has opted into, etc. So when merging lead and contact records, their associated individual records will also be merged. So what used to happen was the winning lead, its individual record was the winning individual record, whereas now you can choose to retain the most recently updated individual record. It's recently modified rather than that of the winner, and you configure this via individual settings in setup. Individual is now a first-class S object, so it supports those features that I've listed there and more besides. So it should support much the same as something like leads and contacts. And finally, on the privacy side of things, from the user perspective rather than from your leads or contacts perspective, you can now obfuscate the personal data that you kept about a user on their record at their request. It gets completely scrambled and it's unrecoverable. So if you're thinking about doing this, make absolutely sure that that user has left the company and you're never going to need to get any of that information again. The health check functionality now has grades, ranging from excellent to very poor indeed, rather than just a flat percentage. Next, we have some enhancements to flow. Local actions, quite excited about these. So local actions are now generally available. They've been in pilot and beta for a while. So what this allows you to do is drop a lightning component into the flow, and when the flow hits that lightning component, it will execute the invoke method from its JavaScript controller. And that can then do funky things like call out to a whitelisted external site and get some information from that without having to round trip to the Salesforce server. So quite a lot of scope, I think, for some interesting stuff to be done with that. Flows now support stages, so you can track how far a user is through the flow. And in the flow designer, you can debug a flow if you're having problems with it. However, this is not in a transaction that will be rolled back. So your flow will be running live and any changes that it makes will stick. So this would be like testing JavaScript. It's not like testing Apex. There is no transaction that's going to roll back. So anything you do will make changes. So changes will be made to the database and potentially information will be sent to back-end systems. And finally, in the process and flow error emails, they now allow you to define how you want to receive, so who you want to receive them, and to include the org name and the ID. So next up, something I spend a lot of time working with, lightning components. So you can now enable debug mode on a per user basis rather than having to switch over the whole org with the associated performance hit for everyone. So that's pretty nice. Something we've been looking for a long time over here on BrightGen, specifically around our Bright Media offering. You can now make Lightning components URL addressable, so you can navigate to them programmatically. Previously, that wasn't possible, and there was always a little bit of a workaround involving Visualforce or something like that. If you'd like to know more about that and see some code using it, there's a detailed blog post there, the short link shown there. The with sharing critical update that we spoke about our last webinar has been postponed. If you didn't attend that webinar, the idea was that this is a change to make the default for Lightning component controllers that they execute without taking the user's sharing settings into account, essentially giving them access to any record they had a license to see, regardless of whether it had been shared with them or not. So that's been postponed. However, when it does happen, which is scheduled for spring 19 now, you can still easily override this by explicitly specifying with sharing on the class. So it's only if you leave it up to the platform that it will make that decision. A couple more releases to prepare, but you can work around it quite easily. And broken components no longer throw errors in the Lightning App Builder. They just get removed, and where it was, there's an error shown to the user saying it's broken and now it's gone. Okay, this is another really cool feature, I think, if you're having to maintain some users who are working in Classic and Lightning, or if you've got a bunch of Visualforce that uses mainly standard components, but you want to include that into your Lightning experience applications. So Lightning Experience styling is now available for standard Visualforce components. So if you specify the Lightning Style Sheets attribute as true, as I have here, then when a Visualforce page is viewed in Classic, it will appear with Classic styling. But when the same page with no changes is viewed in the Lightning Experience, it will appear with, God, too fast. It'll appear with, that's my big moment as well. It'll appear with Lightning styling. So you don't have to make any changes at all to that. The platform will handle generating the appropriate CSS classes based on the user interface you're using. However, this only works for standard Visualforce components. So if you've done some custom components with custom styling, they will not be affected. So always test it out in both experiences before you unleash it on your users. New field type. It's quite exciting. We don't get many of these. The time field is now generally available. So this is a point in time without an associated date. So kind of thing you'd use for things like working hours. The date itself doesn't matter. It's always, we start at 9 and we finish at 5, for example. In the Lightning Experience and Salesforce mobile apps, you'll enter time fields via pick lists rather than having to type them in. And to carry out arithmetic operations and things like formulas, then milliseconds are the unit. So in this case, that's adding 1 hour by adding 3.6 million milliseconds. Okay, some changes on the coding side of things. Any developers out there will be rejoicing at this one because it's always been painful and it's always bitness. You can now access the developer name of a record type via the describe calls, which means you don't need to query the database, which means you don't need to consume one of your limited SOCL calls in a transaction. And what it also means is that because you can get it easily, people won't decide that the record type label is close enough with the attendant problems that gives you once you get into things like translations, which I've known in the past. When testing Apex controllers for Visualforce pages, you can now clear the error messages rather than trying to figure out if an existing message was generated by your code or not. So that's really nice. And compile on deploy is now generally available. So this means that when you do a metadata deployment, your code gets automatically recompiled to ensure it's still valid. This is enabled on production and cannot be disabled, and it's configurable in other orgs, but the default is to be disabled. And the maximum debug log size has increased from 2 to 5 megabytes, which Salesforce suggests should solve any kind of issues around the maximum being limited for most customers. Judging by our experience, you'll still need to play around with log levels to reduce the amount of system log noise that is created, but you stand more of a chance of being able to get at the important information when it's that much larger. And debug logs are only retained on the platform for 24 hours, so if you need to keep them longer to examine them, you'll need to download them and store them somewhere yourself. Next up, something that developers on Salesforce have been looking forward to for literally years, a switch statement in Apex. So to demonstrate this, I just created a very simple Visualforce page where a user enters a record ID, and then I've got some code that figures out what type of S object it is, And then based on that, it generates a link to some trailhead content specific to that link. So here's my switch statement here. I've already figured out the S object type. And then I just say, if it's an account or a contact, then there's the trailhead link to that. If it's a lead or opportunity, then that. If it's a case, then it goes there. Otherwise, because I'm lazy, if it's any other S object type, it just goes straight off to Salesforce. Sorry, it's trailhead, the default trailhead page. For the developers out there, there is no fall through, so I couldn't have when account and contact then falling through and to also pick up the lead and opportunity section. Basically, once a when is complete, it then drops out of the switch statement. And a few more changes around customization. You can now rename my domain whenever you want to. You used to be able to rename it, but you had to contact Salesforce support and wait for a little while. This isn't supported in trial or sandbox orgs, but it is in production. So hopefully this will speed up the decision. So it's always been my experience that once you're asking people to choose my domain, which is going to go into their Salesforce org, which everyone's going to see, and is going to be difficult to change, then you get into a bit of analysis paralysis. No one wants to take the decision and choose the wrong domain. So the fact that it can be renamed as at will hopefully speed up some of those decisions. You can override the sender address for the emails that are sent when requesting approval. You can use a formula field to set the default value for a pick list field and a custom action rather than having to pick one specific one. And finally, you can opt out of code coverage when executing tests, which will speed up your test execution. However, I think most people focus on writing tests and running tests when they're desperately trying to get to code coverage. So how many people will actually do this, I don't know. But the option is there. So that brings us to the end of the new features part of the webinar. So well done everyone that's stuck around. This is our biggest deck we've done because there's so many new features in each release. It's about 10% bigger than our last webinar. So well done for making it through to that. So as usual, I always say this, it's been a light touch. We've gone through and we identify the areas that we think will be of interest, most of interest to our customers. There's loads more information at the official Salesforce site, including the full 517 pages of release notes, webinar recordings, videos, and there's also a Trailhead release badge to be earned once you've been through all the contacts. So if you need to know more details of anything we've said, or you need to know about other areas, then that's the place to go to. So that brings me to the end of my talking. I'll take a well-earned sip of water and ask Clive if we've got any questions.
Well, well done, Keir. That was quite a marathon. Yeah, you're quite right. One of our longest, biggest, and the most content in any webinar we've done so far. But I'm sorry, mate, you can't relax just yet, as we do have a couple of questions for you. So the first one is it true that you can push report charts to a dashboard rather than adding a report component on a dashboard?
So what it'd be is you'd be adding a component to the dashboard. This is feature parity with Classic. You add a component to the dashboard backed by a report, and you say use the chart from the report rather than generating your own one.
Okay, thank you. Next, do you think the individual object will ever replace the person account combo?
No, I don't think it will, because I think the individual object is basically the it's not Salesforce's solution to GDPR, because obviously it's not for Salesforce to solve people's GDPR problems or GDPR policies, etc. That comes down to the individual organization, but it's about providing a home for some of the data that informs the GDPR policies, whereas person accounts are much more about dealing with individual entities. So person accounts were originally done many moons ago for the telecoms industry, and there's typically 2 or 3 different approaches to it. So person accounts is the one that pulls together the account and contact and makes them look like a single record, and then there's a couple of other kind of community inspired solutions that leave them as separate records but try and pretend they're something slightly different. I don't think it will replace the person accounts, and I'm sure there will be. I know there have been some enhancements to person accounts in the last few releases, and I'm sure there will continue to be more on those. But I'd expect individual to continue on as a container for privacy information for a contact or a lead that can be kind of dealt with in its own right, rather than having to navigate from the contact or lead.
Cool. Thank you, Keir. Just one more question for you. One of the audience thought they heard there were nested folders in this release.
There are indeed nested folders in this release on reports and dashboards, and I can't remember if they're in files or not. Yes, they are part of that. That will be in the release notes. There's some setup required for that as well. Yeah, that'll be in the release notes if you go through. Yeah, as I said, we do a relatively light touch because otherwise you'd all be sitting here for 2 hours, and nobody wants that, not even me, much as I love the sound of my voice.
Okay, well, you'll be pleased to know that is the end of the questions. So thank you ever so much for going through that with us. Well, now, it wouldn't be a BrightGen webinar without a plug from me for our next service management event. So if people are interested, we're having one on the 3rd of July. It'll be 3:30 p.m. in Salesforce Tower. And we'll be going through how service management, which is what I look after here at BrightGen, can help you get on-demand support, ongoing improvement, and help you get more from your Salesforce solution. You also get to meet some of the team, and you can hear from one of our family of customers, Christina Brown of Guardian News and Media. She'll be giving an insight into what it's like to be a BrightGen service management customer. There's a sign-up link there on the slide. We'll be sending this out with the recording of the webinar, so you can use that link there. Or alternatively, you can go to brightgen.com, click on resources, and then click on events, and you'll see there a link to register for the service management event. I hope some of you who are considering service management as a way forward for getting improvement to your solution, I hope you come and see us, listen to what we can do for you. And there's drinks and eats as well, obviously, so what's not to like? So that's enough from me. If there's nothing else, Keir, from your side?
Nothing from me.
Cool. Okay, many thanks to all of you for joining us. I hope you found the session useful. We'll be sending out the slide deck, as I say, and the recording of the webinar to everyone. So if you didn't quite catch it all, you can have another read and another listen. But if you want to know more, please do get in touch with us here at BrightGen. We'll be happy to discuss any aspect of what you've heard or any other aspect of the release with you further. And if it's specific to your requirements, you know, the more the better, really. So we're here. Give us a call. Just remains for me to say thank you all once again for attending, and we'll speak to you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.